Not your name, not your job, not your social status. They sense your empathy, the way you listen a little longer, the way you forgive a little faster, the way you try to understand even when you're hurting. And to a narcissist, that feels like opportunity. Have you ever met someone who seemed magnetically drawn to you at first? Intense eye contact, deep conversations, instant connection, only to slowly drain your energy, confidence, and peace. That wasn't random. It wasn't fate. It was psychology. Carl Jung believed that what we don't heal in ourselves seeks expression through others. So what happens when deep empathy meets an unhealed ego? In this video, you'll discover why empaths are rare, why narcissists can sense them from a distance, and the one powerful shift that makes you impossible to manipulate. Stay until the end, because what I'm about to reveal might completely change how you see your past relationships. And if this already feels a little too familiar, subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like someone targeted your kindness? Empaths are often misunderstood as simply sensitive people, but that word barely scratches the surface of what they truly are. Sensitivity suggests fragility, yet real empathy requires strength. Carl Jung spoke about the archetype of the wounded healer, a person who has suffered, reflected, and developed a deep awareness of the human condition. This is the psychological space where true empaths live. They are not just emotional, they are emotionally intelligent. They do not just feel, they understand. When someone walks into a room carrying silent pain, an empath senses it almost immediately. Not because they are psychic, but because they are deeply attuned to emotional undercurrents. They notice the slight shift in tone, the forced smile, the hesitation between words. While others hear what is said, the empath hears what is avoided. What makes them rare is not that they have emotions, but that they are not afraid of emotions. Most people suppress discomfort. They distract themselves from pain, deny insecurity, and avoid vulnerability. Empaths do the opposite. They lean in. They feel what others suppress. When someone is grieving but pretending to be fine, the empath feels the grief beneath the mask. When someone is angry but hiding fear, the empath senses the fear behind the anger. This ability comes from experience. Many empaths have walked through their own emotional darkness. They know what it feels like to be unheard, unseen, misunderstood. Instead of becoming hardened, they became aware. That awareness allows them to recognize the same wounds in others. They also notice what others ignore. In conversations, they pick up on micro-expressions and subtle energy shifts. In relationships, they detect imbalance long before it becomes obvious. They sense when someone's words and actions do not match. This perception is quiet but powerful. It is not loud intuition or dramatic insight. It is a steady inner knowing. And because they are so used to understanding others, they often give people the benefit of the doubt. They assume depth in others because they themselves operate from depth. Another defining trait of empaths is that they absorb what others project. Projection, in Jungian psychology, happens when someone unconsciously places their own denied traits onto another person. A narcissist who denies their insecurity may accuse others of being insecure. A person who suppresses anger may claim everyone else is hostile. Empaths, due to their openness, can unintentionally carry these projections. They feel responsible for emotions that are not theirs. They internalize blame. They try to fix problems they did not create. This is not weakness, it is overextension of compassion. They are so accustomed to holding emotional space that they sometimes forget to protect their own. In today's world, this kind of depth is uncommon. Modern society rewards speed, productivity, image, and dominance. Emotional detachment is often mistaken for strength. People are praised for being unbothered, unaffected, untouchable. Vulnerability is treated like a liability. In such an environment, emotional intelligence becomes a quiet superpower. An empath's ability to truly listen, to connect, to understand complexity stands out. They can build deep trust quickly. They can calm chaos with presence alone. They can make others feel seen in a way that is rare and unforgettable. But here is the uncomfortable truth: predators recognize power. Not all power looks aggressive. Some power is warmth. To a manipulative personality, an empath's openness signals opportunity. Their patience suggests tolerance. Their understanding suggests forgiveness. Narcissistic individuals who constantly seek validation and emotional supply are highly observant when it comes to identifying those who will give them attention, admiration, and emotional labor. They may not consciously think, "This person is an empath," but they instinctively gravitate toward those who radiate compassion and depth. The tragedy is that what makes empaths extraordinary is also what can make them vulnerable. Their strength lies in connection, but connection without boundaries can become exhaustion. Jung believed that true growth comes from individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating both light and shadow. For an empath, this means recognizing that compassion must be balanced with self-protection. Feeling deeply is a gift, but it must be guided by awareness. Empaths are rare not because emotions are rare, but because conscious emotional depth is rare. In a culture that encourages masks, the empath chooses authenticity. In a world that avoids discomfort, the empath sits with it. They are living proof that strength does not have to be loud. It can be quiet, perceptive, steady, and profoundly human. And that quiet strength, when combined with self-awareness, becomes something no manipulator can easily control. Teach can't sense woe you. That line sounds dramatic, almost supernatural, but psychologically it is deeply accurate. When we say narcissists can sense emotional energy, we are not talking about magic or mind reading. We are talking about pattern recognition shaped by insecurity and survival. Narcissistic personalities are highly attuned to certain signals in their environment, especially signals that indicate validation, admiration, and emotional availability. They may not consciously analyze it, but on a subconscious level they are constantly scanning the room. Who is watching them closely? Who laughs the loudest at their jokes? Who listens with full attention? Who seems kind, patient, and eager to understand? Beneath the surface, the question running in their mind is simple: who will reflect my greatness back to me? Narcissists depend on external validation to stabilize their fragile self-image. Despite appearing confident, many struggle with deep insecurity. Their self-worth is not internally grounded, so they seek mirrors in other people. They look for individuals who will amplify their strengths, overlook their flaws, and provide steady emotional reinforcement. This is why they are hyper-aware of emotional cues. They notice who is empathetic, who is attentive, who is willing to give more than they receive. It is not that they sense energy in a mystical way. They are experts at identifying emotional supply. Over time, through repeated relational patterns, they develop an instinct for spotting it quickly. Empaths naturally stand out in this scanning process. They radiate warmth, their body language is open, they make eye contact, they ask thoughtful questions, they validate feelings. When someone speaks, they genuinely listen instead of waiting for their turn to talk. To most healthy people, these qualities feel comforting and safe. To a narcissist, they feel useful. Emotional accessibility signals potential supply. Patience signals tolerance. Deep understanding signals someone who might excuse harmful behavior. The empath does not intend to broadcast vulnerability, yet their openness can appear like an invitation to someone seeking control. This dynamic is rooted in psychological reinforcement. Narcissists learn early in life that certain types of people respond to charm, intensity, and confidence. When they encounter someone who reacts strongly to their presence, whether with admiration or deep attention, their brain registers it as reward. Over time, this becomes a refined skill. They may initiate intense eye contact, share personal stories quickly, or create a sense of fast emotional bonding. Then they observe, does this person lean in closer? Do they respond with empathy? Do they try to understand and soothe? If the answer is yes, the narcissist unconsciously identifies a match. It is important to understand that this sensing process is not always deliberate manipulation in the beginning. For some narcissistic personalities, it is automatic. They have built relational habits around securing validation. Just as an empath naturally tunes into emotional shifts, a narcissist naturally tunes into validation opportunities. Both are perceptive, but their motivations differ. The empath seeks connection. The narcissist seeks reinforcement. There is also a subtle behavioral dance that happens. Empaths often give. They may offer emotional support without being asked. They may excuse red flags because they sense hidden pain. They may respond to inconsistency with more effort instead of distance. A narcissist notices this pattern. When they pull away slightly and the empath moves closer, it confirms the dynamic. When they criticize and the empath tries harder to please, it reinforces control. These reactions become predictable, and predictability is powerful. This is why the phrase "they can sense you" resonates so strongly. It captures the unsettling experience many empaths describe: feeling seen too quickly, understood too intensely, and then gradually drained. The narcissist senses availability the way a skilled negotiator senses leverage. They identify who will invest emotionally, who will prioritize them, and who will tolerate imbalance. It is not mystical intuition. It is psychological pattern recognition shaped by unmet needs and reinforced behaviors. However, sensing does not equal destiny. Awareness changes everything. When empaths understand how their warmth and openness can be perceived, they gain the power to choose differently. They can still be compassionate without being overexposed. They can still listen deeply without giving unlimited access. Emotional energy is powerful, but it does not have to be freely available to everyone who recognizes it. In the end, narcissists sense what reflects them. Empaths sense what connects them. One seeks admiration, the other seeks understanding. When these two energies meet without awareness, imbalance often follows. But when awareness enters the equation, the dynamic shifts. What was once easy supply becomes conscious choice. And once that choice is deliberate, the sensing no longer leads to control. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a shadow, the hidden part of the personality that contains the traits, emotions, and desires we reject or suppress. The shadow is not always evil, it is simply the parts of us we are uncomfortable facing. It can hold our anger, our insecurity, our neediness, our vulnerability, even our strength. According to Jung, we are often drawn to people who embody the very qualities we have pushed out of our own awareness. This is where what we call chemistry can become complicated. Sometimes what feels like fate is actually shadow attraction. And nowhere is this more intense than in the dynamic between a narcissist and an empath. Narcissists typically suppress vulnerability. On the surface, they appear confident, self-assured, even superior. But beneath that exterior often lies a deep fear of inadequacy. Instead of acknowledging this fear, they bury it. They construct an identity built on control, admiration, and dominance. Vulnerability feels dangerous to them because it threatens the image they work so hard to maintain. So they disconnect from it. They deny their own emotional fragility and project strength at all costs. Empaths, on the other hand, live in vulnerability. They are comfortable exploring emotions, even painful ones. They do not see sensitivity as weakness. In fact, they often see it as honesty. They are willing to admit when they are hurt, confused, or afraid. They value emotional depth and authenticity. Where the narcissist builds walls, the empath opens doors. Where the narcissist hides weakness, the empath embraces it as part of being human. This contrast creates magnetic tension. The narcissist encounters someone who embodies the very emotional openness they have disowned. The empath encounters someone who appears strong and certain, qualities they may feel they lack at times. On a subconscious level, each sees something in the other that feels powerful. The narcissist is drawn to the empath's depth because it represents a part of themselves they cannot access. The empath is drawn to the narcissist's confidence because it represents stability and protection. The pull can feel electric, immediate, and intense. But this intensity is not necessarily love. It is often projection. The narcissist sees emotional depth they lack and becomes fascinated by it. They may admire the empath's compassion, their insight, their ability to understand others. Yet instead of developing those qualities within themselves, they attempt to possess them through the relationship. If they can secure the empath's attention and devotion, it feels like borrowing that depth without having to cultivate it. The empath, meanwhile, sees woundedness beneath the narcissist's ego. They sense the insecurity behind the arrogance, the fear behind the control. And because they are naturally compassionate, they want to heal it. They believe that with enough patience and love, they can reach the vulnerable core the narcissist hides. Both individuals are unconsciously trying to complete something within themselves. The narcissist seeks external validation to fill an internal void. The empath seeks to heal others as a way of affirming their own worth. Each believes the other holds the missing piece. This is why the connection can feel profound in the beginning. There is a sense of recognition, of being seen, of something meaningful unfolding. Yet what is being recognized is often not the true self, but the shadow. Shadow projection happens when we assign our renowned traits to someone else. The narcissist may project their vulnerability onto the empath, viewing them as overly emotional or weak, while secretly needing that very emotional capacity. The empath may project their own desire for strength and certainty onto the narcissist, idealizing their confidence and leadership. Instead of integrating these qualities within themselves, both rely on the relationship to supply them. Over time, this creates imbalance. The narcissist may begin to resent the empath's emotional needs because they reflect the vulnerability they refuse to face. The empath may become exhausted trying to rescue someone who resists being healed. This is why Jung emphasized individuation, the process of becoming whole by acknowledging and integrating the shadow. Without this work, we are driven by unconscious forces. We mistake projection for destiny. We call intense attraction soul connection, when it may actually be two wounded parts reaching for completion. Real love requires seeing the other person clearly, not as a symbol of what we lack, but as a separate individual with their own inner world. When shadow attraction is at play, the relationship often revolves around unmet needs rather than mutual growth. The narcissist feeds on admiration while avoiding self-examination. The empath gives endlessly while neglecting their own boundaries. The magnetic tension that once felt powerful begins to feel draining. What started as fascination becomes confusion. Understanding shadow theory does not mean blaming either side. It means recognizing that unconscious wounds create unconscious bonds. When those wounds remain unexamined, the connection cannot evolve into something healthy. It remains stuck in projection. And projection, no matter how intense it feels, is not love. It is the mind's attempt to complete itself through another, instead of doing the courageous work of becoming whole on its own. Empaths don't fall for narcissists because they are weak or naive. They stay because of something much deeper. Their compassion is not shallow, and their desire to understand others is not a flaw, it is their strength. But this very strength can sometimes lead them into what psychologists call the savior trap. Empaths naturally notice pain in others, and they feel a pull toward people who are hurting, even when that pain is masked by charm or arrogance. They see potential where others see flaws. They sense trauma behind the confident facade, and they instinctively want to help, to heal, to nurture. Their heart tells them that love can mend brokenness, that patience and empathy can guide someone to a better place. This is not weakness, it is humanity. Yet it is also the mechanism by which narcissists can quietly entangle empaths in a cycle of emotional imbalance. Carl Jung warned that the unconscious drives much of human behavior, stating, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This warning is especially relevant for empaths in relationships with narcissists. On the surface, the initial attraction feels fated, almost destined. There is an intense mirroring effect. At the beginning, the narcissist reflects the empath's values, interests, and emotions. It feels like instant connection. The empath experiences what seems like understanding and validation, while the narcissist gains admiration and attention. In these early stages, the narcissist's withdrawal is minimal, and the empath's natural inclination to nurture is rewarded. It feels like mutual recognition, but in reality, it is the first step in a subtle imbalance. As the relationship progresses, the narcissist begins to withdraw gradually. Attention becomes inconsistent, praise is withheld, and emotional support diminishes. For the empath, this creates confusion because their instinct is to maintain harmony, offer reassurance, and fill emotional gaps. They try harder, believing that their love and patience can restore closeness. This is where trauma bonding often develops. The empath interprets the highs and lows of the relationship as normal or even romantic, while the narcissist's behavior reinforces their commitment. The brief moments of warmth and connection trigger the empath's reward system, making them more likely to forgive or overextend themselves. This cycle continues because the empath's very qualities, compassion, patience, and understanding, are precisely what the narcissist exploits. Narcissists are experts at identifying individuals who will tolerate inconsistency and continue to provide emotional supply. The empath's belief in the transformative power of love makes them vulnerable to repeated cycles of giving without equivalent reciprocity. They may feel exhausted, doubting themselves, or frustrated, but they often justify staying by focusing on the narcissist's potential rather than the reality of their patterns. Their focus is on the idea of change rather than the ongoing dynamic that is hurting them. The savior trap also involves projection. The empath unconsciously projects their desire to heal and nurture onto the narcissist, while the narcissist projects vulnerability onto the empath in subtle ways to gain trust or sympathy. Both parties are operating through layers of unconscious behavior, the narcissist seeking validation and control, and the empath seeking purpose and connection. For the empath, this can feel like destiny, as if their meeting and bond were inevitable. Yet what feels fated is often a repeated pattern of unconscious dynamics, not a conscious choice. Recognizing this pattern requires awareness and self-reflection, the very process Jung emphasized as necessary to break the cycle. It is important to understand that empaths are not inherently damaged or weak because they fall into the savior trap. Their empathy is their superpower, but it can be misdirected when boundaries are unclear or when they mistake emotional manipulation for need. The key lies in conscious awareness, noticing when one's compassion is being used as a tool for someone else's gain, and differentiating between helping someone grow and attempting to fix what they are unwilling to change. When empaths understand these dynamics, they can still be compassionate without being trapped. Ultimately, the savior trap demonstrates how empathy, when combined with unconscious patterns, can lead to repeated cycles of imbalance. The initial attraction feels profound, the highs are intoxicating, and the empath's belief in the healing power of love keeps them engaged. Yet the cycle, narcissist mirroring, withdrawal, empath giving more, continues until awareness interrupts it. Understanding the pattern is not about losing empathy or closing one's heart. It is about aligning compassion with discernment, learning to recognize the signals, and choosing relationships that honor reciprocity, not repetition. In this way, the empath transforms their strength from vulnerability into clarity, from giving without limit into conscious connection. The dynamic between empaths and narcissists often creates a powerful paradox, one that feels magnetic at first but can slowly become exhausting if left unchecked. Empaths are naturally drawn to emotional depth. They crave meaningful connections, honest conversations, and moments where vulnerability is met with understanding. For them, relationships are not just about surface-level interaction, they are about feeling, sharing, and truly seeing one another. This is their strength, but it also makes them sensitive to the energy of others. Narcissists, on the other hand, are often drawn to dominance rather than depth. Their primary interest lies in control, admiration, and maintaining a favorable image rather than in genuine emotional exchange. They may enter a relationship seeking to charm and impress, creating an illusion of connection that feels intense and irresistible. At first, the interaction often feels electric. There may be deep, late-night conversations, rapid bonding, and the sense that they are somehow uniquely understood. The empath feels seen, heard, and valued in a way that many people rarely experience, while the narcissist benefits from admiration and attention without revealing the full truth of themselves. This initial phase often becomes the anchor that draws empaths deeper into the relationship, making it difficult to recognize the subtle shifts that follow. However, the intensity of connection without genuine reciprocity inevitably leads to depletion. While empaths give freely, offering compassion, emotional support, and understanding, the narcissist primarily consumes. They may take in empathy, validation, and reassurance without offering the same in return. Over time, this imbalance begins to manifest in tangible ways. The empath may start to feel confused when their efforts to connect do not yield mutual care. They may feel exhausted, as though their emotional energy is being drained rather than replenished. Conflicting signals from the narcissist, warmth one moment, coldness the next, intensify this confusion, leaving the empath questioning their own perceptions and reactions. This is not a failure of empathy or kindness, it is the natural outcome of an uneven exchange. Emotional depth requires reciprocity to sustain itself, and when that balance is absent, even the strongest empath can feel overwhelmed. The challenge lies in recognizing the difference between depth and depletion. Depth is restorative, enriching, and mutually rewarding. It allows both individuals to feel safe, understood, and engaged. Depletion, by contrast, erodes confidence and clarity. It often begins subtly, with small acts of over-giving or overlooking red flags, but over time, the empath's sense of self can be compromised. They may start to doubt their own worth, question their judgment, or feel responsible for the narcissist's mood and behavior. The empathy that once felt like a gift can feel like a burden, and the connection that initially brought joy can begin to feel like a source of stress. Emotional depletion can affect every area of life, influencing relationships with friends, family, and even one's own sense of purpose. Narcissists are rarely aware of the impact they have on empaths, not because they are malicious at every moment, but because their focus is on themselves. They do not intentionally seek to hurt, rather they are guided by a need for validation and control. This creates a relationship dynamic where the empath invests emotionally, hoping to be understood and reciprocated, while the narcissist unconsciously or consciously takes what they need without considering the cost to the other person. The empath's natural ability to absorb and process emotions amplifies this dynamic, making the disparity more pronounced over time. Understanding this paradox is critical for empaths to navigate their own emotional boundaries. It is not a call to shut down empathy, but a call to recognize the difference between relationships that nourish and those that drain. Empaths can still seek depth, but they must do so with awareness, observing whether their emotional investment is met with balanced engagement. They must distinguish between someone who truly wants to connect and someone who merely consumes energy under the guise of intimacy. The first requires mutual care and effort. The second relies on imbalance and exploitation. Ultimately, the contrast between emotional depth and emotional drain illustrates why relationships between empaths and narcissists often become complicated. The initial intensity of connection can feel transformative, yet without reciprocity, it slowly depletes the empath. Confusion, exhaustion, and self-doubt are natural consequences of giving more than one receives, even when motivated by compassion and understanding. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward reclaiming emotional balance. By understanding that depth requires reciprocity, empaths can honor their own capacity to give while protecting themselves from being consumed, transforming their emotional intelligence from a vulnerability into a source of strength. The dynamic between a narcissist and a self-aware empath is one of the most fascinating psychological relationships because it completely disrupts the narcissist's sense of control. Narcissists rely on a carefully constructed illusion, one in which they are admired, validated, and allowed to maintain dominance while avoiding accountability. Their interactions with others are often choreographed around these patterns: the manipulation, the gaslighting. The emotional highs and lows are all part of a subtle system designed to maintain power and feed their fragile self-esteem. But a self-aware empath changes the rules entirely. This is why narcissists fear empaths who have done the work of understanding themselves, their own triggers, and the ways they are targeted. Awareness is not just knowledge, it is power. When an empath becomes conscious of the strategies used against them, they stop participating unconsciously, and the very mechanisms that give the narcissist control begin to fail. A self-aware empath can see projection for what it is. Narcissists project constantly, shifting their insecurities, anger, or flaws onto others to avoid facing their own shadow. In ordinary circumstances, an empath may absorb these projections, feeling responsible for the narcissist's anger, shame, or disappointment. They may overanalyze, over-apologize, or try to compensate, unintentionally feeding the narcissist's sense of dominance. But when the empath recognizes that the criticism or blame is not theirs, that it is a reflection of the other person's unresolved issues, the dynamic changes. The empath no longer internalizes manipulation. They can respond with clarity instead of reacting emotionally, which removes the unconscious supply the narcissist depends on. Gaslighting, another tool narcissists use to maintain control, also loses its effectiveness with self-aware empaths. Gaslighting works because the empath initially trusts their own perception and values harmony over confrontation. By questioning their reality and doubting themselves, they become more malleable. But once an empath understands the signs of gaslighting, contradictions in stories, subtle minimizations, deliberate distortions, they stop questioning their own truth. They observe instead of reacting. An observation is neutral and powerful. It does not feed the narcissist. The empath no longer flinches at every criticism, does not feel compelled to justify themselves unnecessarily, and no longer allows confusion to dictate their behavior. In essence, the mirror the narcissist has relied upon for validation begins to shatter. Recognizing manipulation patterns is another crucial factor. Narcissists often rely on predictable sequences: charm, withdrawal, blame, guilt, and occasional reinforcement to maintain engagement. These patterns, when unnoticed, feel overwhelming because the empath naturally responds to emotional cues. But when self-aware, the empath begins to map the pattern rather than react to it. They can predict behavior without being caught in the emotional storm. The awareness transforms the relationship from chaotic to manageable. The narcissist, who thrives on chaos and emotional unpredictability, suddenly encounters resistance not through confrontation, but through conscious observation. Their tools lose potency, and the illusion they depend on starts to unravel. Once the empath stops reacting unconsciously and begins observing consciously, the power dynamic flips. The narcissist can no longer rely on emotional overreactions, guilt, or confusion to maintain dominance. The empath's calm awareness acts as a barrier and a mirror simultaneously. It reflects the narcissist's true behaviors without distortion and resists manipulation without aggression. In this environment, the narcissist is uncomfortable because they are used to operating in relationships where their control is invisible, unquestioned, and unquestionable. The self-aware empath removes the safety of that illusion. The narcissist may feel threatened, frustrated, or even fearful because their entire relational strategy no longer functions. This fear is rooted in the narcissist's dependence on external validation. They have constructed a world in which others' reactions reinforce their self-image and hide their vulnerabilities. A self-aware empath refuses to play the part of mirror or emotional supply, leaving the narcissist exposed. Without the reinforcement of confusion, fear, or excessive accommodation, the narcissist faces their own shadow, the very parts of themselves they have spent a lifetime avoiding. This confrontation is deeply uncomfortable, which explains why narcissists often escalate behaviors, withdraw entirely, or attempt alternative manipulations when they sense that an empath has gained awareness. In essence, a self-aware empath is dangerous, not because they are aggressive or confrontational, but because they break the system. They transform from a reactive participant into an observant and conscious presence, dismantling manipulation strategies without aggression. They understand projection, recognize gaslighting, and see patterns clearly, rendering illusions ineffective. In these moments, the empath's emotional intelligence and self-awareness shift the power dynamic entirely. What once favored the narcissist now favors the empath. The balance of control tilts, the narrative changes, and the narcissist is forced to confront the reality they have long avoided. It is not revenge or hostility, it is clarity, observation, and conscious choice. And for a narcissist, there are few things more threatening than that level of insight. Carl Jung's ultimate lesson about human development is often misunderstood as a call to avoid the dark, difficult, or uncomfortable parts of ourselves, but in reality, it is the opposite. He emphasized the process of individuation, which is the journey of becoming whole by integrating both the light and shadow aspects of our personality. For empaths, this lesson is especially powerful. Living with high sensitivity and deep compassion can feel like a blessing, but without conscious development, it can also become a source of vulnerability. Empaths often give endlessly, absorb emotional energy from others, and prioritize connection over their own well-being. In relationships with narcissists or other manipulative personalities, this openness can be exploited, leaving the empath feeling drained, confused, or even lost. The individuation path encourages empaths to recognize that their compassion must be balanced with awareness, boundaries, and self-respect. Without these elements, giving becomes self-destruction. Boundaries are the first step toward this integration. Being compassionate does not mean saying yes to everything or tolerating abuse, manipulation, or disrespect. Boundaries are not walls, they are clarity. They define what is acceptable and what is not, protecting the empath from being consumed by others' needs or projections. Assertiveness follows naturally from healthy boundaries. It allows empaths to communicate their needs, desires, and limits without guilt. Assertiveness is not aggression, it is self-respect in action. When empaths speak with clarity and confidence, they create a space in which their emotional intelligence can function as strength rather than vulnerability. Combined with healthy ego development, these tools transform empathy from a reactive, passive trait into an active, conscious force. Healthy ego strength is crucial because it allows empaths to interact with others without losing themselves. Empaths often over-identify with others' feelings, blurring the line between themselves and the person they are trying to help. This over-identification makes them susceptible to emotional manipulation, exhaustion, and burnout. A well-developed ego gives the empath a stable sense of self that is not dependent on others' validation, moods, or approval. It provides an anchor amid emotional turbulence and enables empaths to act from choice rather than compulsion. When empathy is anchored in self-awareness and self-respect, it ceases to be a liability and becomes a source of insight, discernment, and influence. Perhaps the most profound part of Jung's teaching for empaths is the distinction between compassion without boundaries and compassion with awareness. Compassion without awareness can lead to over-giving, enabling, and self-sacrifice, which ultimately harms both the empath and the relationship. Compassion with awareness, however, becomes wisdom. It allows the empath to recognize when giving is helpful and when it is enabling. It teaches them to act from love and understanding rather than guilt, obligation, or fear. Awareness turns emotional generosity into a conscious choice rather than an unconscious pattern. It empowers the empath to see clearly the intentions of others, including manipulative personalities, while still maintaining a kind and open heart. The goal of individuation for empaths is not to stop being empathetic. Sensitivity, emotional intelligence, and deep understanding are gifts that should be preserved and cherished. The aim is to become whole, integrating one's compassion with assertiveness, self-respect, and personal strength. A whole empath is not naive, easily drained, or manipulated. They are grounded, perceptive, and resilient. They understand both the depth of their feelings and the limits necessary to maintain balance. They can connect deeply with others without losing themselves, and they can offer support without being consumed. Once an empath reaches this level of self-integration, something remarkable happens. They are no longer a target. Manipulative individuals, including narcissists, lose their influence because the empath no longer unconsciously provides supply or reacts to control. Their strength is subtle but undeniable. They are emotionally intelligent, discerning, and self-contained. In the language of Jungian psychology, they have confronted their shadow, integrated it, and transformed vulnerability into power. This does not make them aggressive or unfeeling. It makes them untouchable in the sense that they cannot be easily exploited, manipulated, or controlled. Their empathy becomes a conscious force rather than a vulnerability, allowing them to navigate the world with clarity, confidence, and inner peace. In essence, the individuation path is a roadmap for empaths to reclaim their power while remaining true to their compassionate nature. It is about transforming sensitivity into strength, openness into wisdom, and emotional depth into resilience. Through boundaries, assertiveness, and ego development, empaths learn to balance giving with protection, connection with discernment, and compassion with awareness. The result is a form of inner wholeness that not only shields them from manipulation, but also allows them to engage deeply and authentically with the world. Once whole, an empath's presence is no longer vulnerable. It is a quiet, undeniable power that cannot be shaken.